listening to Two Babies and a Business, a podcast about business, marketing, growth, strategy. I don't know what else. Babies, marriage, staff, and clients. I will memorize this one day. I'm Christina. This is Peter. We're founders and leaders of CIPR Communications, and we are continuing to talk about marketing budget.
And today we're going to be talking about budgeting for big projects and how to do it. I think this is a pretty important topic because when it comes to marketing and communications, there are a couple of pretty big projects that you might have on your plate at any given time as a business or every once in a while as a business. So maybe let's just start off with talking about a couple examples of some big projects that people might be thinking about when it comes to this topic. So Christina, what types of projects are we thinking about here?
Yeah, I think the most obvious that people probably think about is a website. I think that many people think about websites as a big project, but also like as a big project every few years. Like it's probably something you need to budget for in your kind of cycle continually.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that I think that people don't often consider a big project that is really top of mind for me is a strategy. So, I mean, you and I did a whole series of podcasts around building your marketing strategy, but often if you don't have marketing expertise on your team or you don't have the resources or just simply want, an external set of eyes, a marketing strategy or a communication strategy is a big project that you can have someone external create for you. And that should be considered a big project as well. You shouldn't kind of just consider that as a part of regular marketing work. I think you definitely need to think about it as standalone.
Yeah. And I'll throw in there also, I mean, another big project that I think people often underestimate, which is sort of similar to a website in a lot of ways and has a lot of the same types of, pains, is bringing on some kind of new tool. I think often when we look at tools, we get sold on, oh, it just costs this much per month. And that's we're so cheap, our tool. But then what you don't realize is that like how much resources it takes internally, how much time, how many add-ons you might need. Usually those tools grow and have a life of their own, and they become quite big projects that become quite all-consuming for a business to implement. So it's sort of similar to a website in the sense because new tools when it comes to marketing communications often touch many departments and many people and really take a team effort to really kind of get over the line successfully. So I think those are the big three that come to mind for me. I mean, the other big project might be just like a specific type of marketing campaign, but we won't necessarily spend too much time, I think, there right now.
Yeah, I think for us, that would be considered in your marketing budget. You got to budget for certain campaigns throughout the year. Yeah. But I was reading this interesting article from BDC. And if you think about kind of their typical clientele and their client base, I think this is really a good place to start. And where I'm suggesting we start is the numbers. Because I think people often go, okay, well, like how much does a website cost? Or how much should I be paying for this? And there's a bit of a blind spot there. Mm-hmm. So in this article, it talks about, so the surveying that BDC did of their clients, the typical range of a website that their small to medium clients were spending was 10 to 30,000 for the initial build. So think about those numbers, 10 to 30,000. And they did have some outliers for some of their larger clients that were as high as 60 to 100,000. So I can imagine there's some more intricate needs in those websites, but I think this 10 to 30 is an important place for listeners to kind of think on, and budget for.
And so in your mind, that 10 to 30, is that just the website itself, or does that include, do you think, kind of internal staff time and management, project management internally? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of your website and your needs. So like, does it need to have a store? Does it need to have a portal where people sign in? Is it going to have a lot of video? Does it need to have a lot of photos? Like all of those things, the more you need, just like filling your grocery cart, the more you fill it, the more it's going to cost when you go to the checkout. So all of those things, but I do think within there, it's probably fair to think about some staff time You do need a strong project manager internally to help you move a website project forward. Not necessarily someone who has a ton of experience, but someone who definitely knows your brand, knows your language, can help spearhead things like content, can help kind of get approvals across the line for an agency is really important. But I think that's a really healthy place for a small business or for a marketing manager in a more medium-sized business to think about putting that line item in between that 10 to 30. And if if you have more needs online, then I would go closer to the 30 range. If you know that you're a little bit more basic, I would stay closer to the 10.
Yeah, and just to give folks a sort of some context, I mean, here at CIPR Communications, we really try not to, I mean, there's always exceptions and there's always like super micro and small websites that we'll build for cheaper, but our kind of base price is, what is it, 6,500, 7,000 as a really starting point. And that doesn't really include, like obviously the content you might need and some video and some really content that you might need on top of that, right? So that really gets you to that 10,000 pretty quick. And
like if you think about those base prices, that's a 10-page website.
Yeah.
And often people will say to me in that process, like, oh yeah, 10 pages, easy. But you start going and, more recently with some of our awesome clients, their websites are like 50 to 60 pages.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone really realizes out the gate that they know they need that many. Yeah. But that whole kind of big project cost is when you hire an agency who's kind of familiar with this world, they'll go through that whole piece with you. Like we start with a really thorough, okay, what's the sitemap? What's the information architecture for your site? And we kind of lead you through that process. So I think too, especially if you don't have someone internally that's ever built a website before or been through that project, make sure that you're going with an agency that is going to hold your hand a little bit. Because really, when you're building a website, you're going to be building content, potentially investing in photography and video that can be leveraged in other places. And that agency can help point you in those directions too.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like anytime you're doing a big project from a marketing and communications purpose, while yes, there's a big upfront cost, I think when you're into that process of that bigger upfront cost, you really got to think about, yes, all of this stuff you're going to be creating, you're going to be leveraging across like over time, right? So to Christina's point, there might be video, there might be photography, there might be case studies, there might be, frequently asked questions. There's all kinds of things you're creating in that upfront project that the goal is really to use it over time and to leverage it as much as possible. So you might want to be thinking about amortizing those costs over time as well, in terms of how you might leverage some of that other content in your campaigns and the execution of your strategies.
Yeah.
But so what are the, overall in the topic of budgeting for big projects, what are some of the kind of high level things you think about that business owners and marketing professionals should be sort of considering when thinking about that budget?
Yeah, so going back to the website and thinking about that, I think there's certain things you need to kind of understand before you start down that path. So things like, we kind of have said this a few times, but the investment and not necessarily an expense. Like your website really is in the investment side, and something that once launched, you're going to grow and change and develop. So yes, your website, especially an initial build or a rebuild, needs to be a line item in your big projects, but you also need to think about it as a reoccurring expense from a maintenance perspective. And
yes,
a great agency will kind of be upfront about maintenance costs. The last thing you want to do is build a website, have the keys handed over, and then have nobody maintaining that. So there are things like plugins that need to be regularly updated. Backups of your website need to be taken in case it gets taken down. So you can't just have your website in a big project bucket and never think about it again. Yeah. So remember to carry some costs forward from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think if you're thinking about other big projects like strategies or new tools, there's a similar type of you should be thinking about a budget ongoing to be going back to that and updating it based on sort of changing circumstances some level of frequency, quarterly, semi-annually, whatever that is.
Yeah, and I think, so you mentioned tools. I have a great example from a client recently where we were engaged to do some newsletters. So kind of just they had another agency covering it before. The cost was quite high. Came to us. We negotiated a deal with them, helped them, and they kind of were quick to adopt a tool. To your point, and then when all was said and done, that tool ended up being quite expensive for them. If you're in the marketing space, you know that any of these newsletter tools or marketing tools kind of grow incrementally based on your list, based on your needs. This client had a list of 20,000 people, so you can imagine the incremental costs associated. And to your point, Peter, like, had they kind of just not had the marketing assistant kind of throw their finger in the air and make a choice on a tool, but thought about that tool as a big project, I think there would have been less sticker shock. And of course, it wasn't our fee; it was the tool's fee, right, which kind of scared them off from all newsletters, which is a shame because newsletters are an important part of business right now. But had they kind of, I think, had some buy-in from the sales team, there was a robust CRM there. Had they kind of talked about the web kind of landing page, forms, that kind of piece with some of the other team members, like, I think there could have been really great value for them had they kind of thought about the onboarding of a tool differently. So
I think that speaks to me a couple different things. Is number one, be very clear about your business goals. And this obviously speaks back to going back to a strategy and having a very detailed, clear strategy in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Because then it puts your conversation around your investments around websites and tools and other things into some context, right? So then it's like, okay, well, this is an expense we need to consider because here's what we're trying to achieve with this expense. And so you can tie it back to that business goal. The other thing I'm hearing from what you're saying is like, you need to spend the time up front doing the research and understanding really what your true costs are going to be. And again, and I'm going to pick on marketing automation as something that we as an agency have kind of, I don't want to say struggled with, but sort of, tried to bring on a few times and really underestimated the amount of workload required to actually make it sort of functional for your agency or for your business. And so, really understand not only the cost of the tool, the added costs or the additional costs that you need for the tool or your website or the plugins or whatever. And a good example is another client recently that we had that decided they wanted to have some search functionality on their website. And then, you sort of went back to them and said, okay, well, this is not as easy as you think it is, right? And here's what's involved and here's what we need from you and here's what we're going to need to do and here's the cost. And then he was like, well, maybe I don't really need that search functionality, right?
And I think that brings up an interesting point about like the power you give to an agency versus the things you should still control. And think about our friends from Mobile Escape, and recently, they're starting to talk about this marketing automation piece. And we did a bunch of research for them and presented 3 different options that we think will suit their needs. And we've, showed the pros and cons. We've done some pricing research for them. We've kind of given a step-by-step on what we think, really built a strategy, and we've passed it back to them and said, okay, now you look at your business and your business goals and your needs and your internal resources and where you're willing to backfill with an agency, and you make the decision. And I think, if I juxtapose that against the first example I gave, they kind of just really removed themselves from the decision-making piece, and we had given them some suggestions, and they said, oh, well, like this one seems like the best, so you just do it. Yeah. And I think, a great agency will give you all the options that make sense. And a great business owner or marketing manager will then take that and make the decision that's right for your business.
Yeah. And on that,
let an agency pigeonhole you into a certain tool. Yes. And if an agency is really pushing you into one, ask some questions. Yeah. Are they getting a kickback? Are they Is it really all it's cracked up to be? Like, there's always reasons. So make sure that if it's not the tool that you think is right for you in your business schools, or you don't have the capacity, that you're asking those questions.
Yeah. And on that note, while I'd love for you to just sort of like, talk to CIPR Communications and decide to choose us, when you're doing this type of research, like talk to various agencies and get various perspectives. And to Christina's point, I mean, we're we try to be very agnostic as an agency when it comes to certain tools and certain technology and certain things. And I can tell you, I mean, even within our supplier network, I mean, we have suppliers pushing us towards, one solution or the other because that's the solution that they've chosen. And my job, I feel, as an agency owner, representing my clients, is to act in the best interest of my clients, not in my own best interest. So selling them a tool that works for me is not really a solution that works for my clients all the times, although hopefully sometimes it can be. But so we really try as an agency to prescribe the right solution to meet that client's business needs. But you only kind of, if you only talk to one agency, you might only get one kind of thing prescribed to you, and you really need to ask a lot of questions to make sure that it fits your business needs, right? So I think the other thing you need to do is really research the competition and understand what your competitive environment looks like. Like, if you're actually, I'm just talking to a prospect right now, and I mean, they have a competitor who's got an amazing website doing lots of e-commerce, all this kind of stuff. They're going to have to compete. They're going to have a website with some equal functionality and similar capabilities. They can't just go for the cheapest website. Their competitive environment is an e-commerce one, and their competitors are currently like smoking them. And they need to make the right investments in order to compete, right? And so,
and I think this is a really great place to kind of like wrap up, and the point here being, before you build a website, before you invest in a tool, before you kind of get going, you should have a really clear landscape in terms of what your competitors are doing. And so this leads me into that other piece in terms of strategy. And I think that people don't often view strategy as a big project, but if you have never undertaken the building of a marketing strategy or some competitive analysis or any of those things in your business, it's time to pause and dedicate some budget to that. And I think, when I think about numbers here, depending on how in depth or the type of organization you are, you could be anywhere between $5,000 and $50,000 for this. So
for a strategy.
Yeah. So like this is potentially a big investment. And as you think about that big number that may have just, made people swallow their coffee hard, it's things like a full marketing strategy, a digital marketing blueprint, a competitive analysis. So all of the things you would need to know to truly be able to just hit the ground running from a strategic perspective, the budget, the persona development, the key messages, the schedule, the everything, like all the things you would need. And I think from the lower price point, it's okay, what do I need to just get going? Well, I need that competitive analysis.
Some analysis of your website and about how you're positioned and your offers, things like that.
And I think, we've talked about this before, especially when we were talking strategy, but when you are starting with a robust strategic kind of outlook, especially if you're investing and getting an outsider to do that, because they're going to have no blinders on in terms of what your website is or not, you're going to end up being more successful. And we have seen time and time again, when talking to whether it's prospects or current clients, like, oh, you want me to like invest $5,000 up front or $10,000 up front for this thing? And yeah, because not only does it help you understand where your budget is going to go further, it helps us become aligned in terms of what those priorities are. And, again, it's an investment. So you're setting yourself up to really understand the landscape and be able to take quick action.
I'm going to just share a little very quickly. I know we're running out of time, but I saw a post on social media yesterday. Somebody said, I invested $1,000 in pay-per-click ads with an agency, and so far I've gotten 0 sales. Should I dump the agency? And like, for me, it was just like, one, that's a major red flag for me as an agency owner, but like, I have 10,000 questions for you. 0 of them have to do anything with the ads or the agency, right? Are your landing page appropriate? Or is your language persuasive? Like there's so many things that go into that. And so that it's like, that is exactly the wrong kind of attitude. And you need to be asking all those questions up front before you spend $1,000 on ads so that you make sure your ads are actually working properly.
Yeah. So long episode today, but I think the important kind of takeaways from this are really like your strategy needs to be a separate line item. It needs to be a big project. And I would say, especially if it is the first time you are hitting the ground running, or if there's been a major change in your business, you need that. You need some grounding. So budget for that. And then I think year over year, it becomes something you can tune up. And it's less of an investment, and it's something potentially you could even handle internally, but take time to invest in that. And 2, don't invest in a website that is $1,000 or $2,000. Yes, there are people out there that can do that, but
you're going to get what you pay for. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. If you enjoy our podcast, please like, comment, and share. We'd really appreciate it.